Again, thanks for joining, and Jim, take it away.
Very good. Thank you, and welcome everybody to our PACE Cyber Insights series. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021. Who can imagine? The title today topic is Tactical and Strategic Implications of the Solarwinds Hack. I'm sure this is top of mind for a lot of folks. I'm your moderator, Jim Mottola, VP of Data Privacy Security and Investigations at Porzio Compliance Services. We have assembled, I think, a great expert panel today to kick this topic around. And I'd like to begin by having each of the panelists introduce themselves. So let's start with David Gordon, please.
Hi, thanks, Jim. My name is David Gordon. I am the founder and CEO of Secure Consult, and we are a private security, IT security firm to the financial services industry. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Vince?
Good morning, everyone. Vince D'Amico, Head of Cybersecurity, Privacy, and Business Continuity for Jennison Associates. We're an asset management firm, and we're having quite a good old time.
Okay, can't wait to hear. Alex Beigelman.
Hi, Alex Beigelman. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Crux Informatics, previously Head of Cyber Risk for JP Morgan, CISO for UBS Americas.
Great, thank you. Alex Schlager.
Good morning, Alex Schlager. I lead product development for cybersecurity at Verizon.
Very good. And Ariel, you might also introduce yourself for folks that missed you.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Ariel Evans. I am the founder and managing director of the PACE cybersecurity program with Cyber Intelligence for You. I'm a former CISO, and I'm the author of Managing Cyber Risk and Enterprise Cybersecurity in Digital Business. Welcome everyone to the program.
Great. Thank you, Ariel. And thank you again for everybody for joining us. So the format, as Ariel said, is we've got a few questions that we're going to ask our panelists and try to give everybody equal time. Please, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, put them in the chat. Myself and Ariel will be reviewing those, and we'll plug them in when appropriate, or we may save time at the end. So let's start off with Alex Beigelman first. Alex, so we need to kind of level set this. What happened with the SolarWinds event, and quite frankly, why is it so important?
Sure. What exactly happened is still TBD, right? There's still a lot of unknowns. There's known unknowns and unknown unknowns, to quote a certain former defense secretary. What we definitely know is that hackers who were most likely Russian intelligence, or at least closely associated with Russian intelligence, were able to implant malicious software in the software build process of a company called Solarwinds, which provides very commonly used monitoring and management software for networking and so on. Very commonly used across industry, very commonly used across the US government in particular. And once that was implanted, it was deployed via normal update processes to the victims. The hackers were then actually quite careful about where they exploited the new vulnerability, right? So they actually did not attack all the victims, at least not to anything I'm aware of. They absolutely did attack very specific organizations, mainly in the US government, but from what is appearing right now, some of it was also commercial. Now, what exactly they got is still not clear. It appears to be primarily an intelligence gathering effort, as opposed to.
All right, Alex, can you hold on one second? Please, I hate to interrupt you. Can someone, if anybody's speaker is on, please turn your microphone off. We can hear your phone call. Not on purpose. Okay, Alex, go ahead.
Yes, we're not hacking you. So
it lets you let us.
Exactly. So it is absolutely not clear as of right now what exactly happened. What it appears to be is primarily an intelligence gathering campaign. There does not appear to have been any specific damage caused that has at least been made public. What we also don't know is if it's over. In fact, the likelihood is that it's not over, that the attackers are continuing to leverage their new access and are continuing to work. And quite frankly, I don't see why they would stop until they are stopped. Now, the way this all started is also not clear exactly how they got in the first place, but what it appears to be from the latest info I've seen in the last few days is that it likely was a malicious email that was delivered by someone at Solarwinds who ultimately ended up clicking it, and that's how you spread everything. But again, that's also not clear. So it is, I think, without argument, the single largest hack in terms of its breadth and depth of the US government that anyone is aware of. It is possibly larger than the NotPetya attack from 2017. Funny enough, conducted by, as much as we know, the same people in a somewhat similar way. They've been more careful, much more directed this time. Last time it got out of control, even for them. But that one was a $10 billion global impact, shut down major companies. This one didn't shut down anyone, as far as we know. But it is the single most successful attack on probably any governmental institution anywhere in the world in history. So it's got all sorts of implications.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It is important, right? Because it's so widespread, and it does mirror a lot of the things that we know happened in Ukraine not too long ago. And I guess that's a great background. I think it's a great way for us to kind of level set this. And what I'd like to do is then pass this to Alex Schlager and ask him, Alex, you know, practically, what is the impact of this event on your security strategy, or what should it be on someone's security strategy now?
Oh, it's a great question. Thank you. You know, from a strategy point of view, not too much has changed on our side. Let me put it like this: you know, the way we have engaged post SolarWinds with our customers was, you know, supporting them in invoking incident response protocols, engaging threat hunting, and understanding if they're affected and to which degree they are affected. The debate that is, or the frustration, let me start with this, the frustration that many customers voiced is, well, you know, if a company like FireEye or SolarWinds gets hacked, you know, how do we have a realistic chance of, you know, of maintaining a secure environment? And to Alex's point, this was a digitally signed, certified software update, right? So if I can't even, to some degree, trust the software updates without any ability to look into these updates from a security perspective, was there anything reasonably I could have done? And the answer is unfortunately no. And the debate, you know, often went to the what we call asymmetry of attention. So there was a lot of debate in cybersecurity in the past about asymmetry of cost, meaning, you know, the cost to protect versus the cost to attack. But we also start thinking about asymmetry of attention, meaning, you know, a defender needs to basically pay attention to, you know, theoretically everything, whereas the attacker can focus on one narrow vector in order to successfully attack. And we don't obviously have an effective mechanism to solve that problem. That, again, from a strategic point of view, made us think again more intensively about cyber quantification, right? So we've spent a lot of time and thought around cyber quantification. So for those of you who are not familiar, it's the simple principle of measuring an entity's cyber maturity, like a credit score, right? But it doesn't measure a risk of default. It measures how mature a certain company or entity is in cybersecurity. Now, I want to be clear, this would have not prevented the SolarWinds hack, but it gives companies a high-level mean to assess how mature they are themselves, right? Without being fully attentive to every single aspect in their environment. And it allows them to look at third entities in sense of, you know, how mature they are. So it doesn't replace vulnerability management. It is really an automated quick glance at, let me have a look how serious you take cybersecurity. So SolarWinds didn't have a terrible score, but it didn't have a great score either, right? So it scored around, around the 600 mark out of 1,000 maximum score. So again, it wouldn't have prevented the SolarWinds breach attack, but, you know, I think we should have a broader debate, and I think we'll touch on third-party risk as we move along today, a broader debate about certain mechanisms and best practices that might that should become more applicable as we move forward in time. So no necessarily impact on strategy, but a broader debate about whether we should deploy, invest, and engage in cyber quantification as a general tool on a broader basis.
Right. Obviously, this is the classic third-party risk, right? And the supply chain issue and zero trust and all the things that we talk about. And really, I think this is a great question for David. David, are you planning to change how you manage third-party risk going forward?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I a couple points around that. One is that third-party risk hasn't changed as a result of the Solarwinds hack. It's always been there. There's always been people in the network that are not, in the domain. And we always had our way of combating threats from third parties. But what I think has happened, and what I'm strongly encouraging my clients to do, is take a more continuous approach to security prevention, pen testing, threat hunting, things like that, because a lot of clients do point-in-time assessments. They figure out that they have a couple vulnerabilities at this given moment, and then they remediate them. But the real challenge is to be continuous and have 0-day kind of addressed on a continuous basis. And I don't think SolarWinds obviously is the only victim of this type of hack. I think it's widespread. Especially in the case of SolarWinds, it affected end users, it affected providers, it affected MSSPs. It was global in its reach, and that's not uncommon when you have such a prevalent tool that's embedded in all these things. So the other point I wanted to make quickly is that you have to balance the ability to do business with third parties with the amount of time you place on securing them. And if your security policies are becoming prohibitive to doing business with these third parties, you have to look for a better way to interact with your third parties that touch your organization. So these are all initiatives, and the last 3 months since the SolarWinds hack has been crazy busy in terms of helping clients understand that and put some systems in place that do that.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of sit on this question for a little while, and we can also take a look back. Our other panelists, any other input and opinions that you all have on this?
Maybe a data point to throw in. We believe that around 18,000 companies actually installed the Orion. That's the name of the software, the Orion update. But the challenge, to David's point, is that it doesn't only affect potentially these 18,000 customers, but also the supply chain downstream. So simple example, it might be an ISP that uses that software, and then companies that are managed or supported by that ISP might be potentially affected, which makes it very difficult to ultimately gauge the final impact of the breach.
Yeah, and just to add something. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, I'll just say something quickly.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. So what came to mind to me when I was looking at this was very carefully planned. This was not, two guys in a basement with a hoodie and a Red Bull, right? It was strategic. The reconnaissance was well thought out. It impacted not only the Fortune 500, but also the federal government. So if you're trying to do something to disrupt the economy, or you're trying to do just something to prohibit democratic elections, as an example, what better method to get a backdoor into these agencies and into these organizations than what they did? So this was well thought out. That was the first thing that came to mind to me when I saw it. The second thing that came to mind to me was the complete lack of understanding of the digital assets that are needing to be protected. And this goes back to Alex Schlager's point of really quantifying and scoring the assets to understand what the impact will be. So in this case with SolarWinds, the vendor program completely was not in place. there was so many things that went wrong. And we have a little timeline that one of the panelists created that you can take a look. And this kind of goes to a question that Francois just put up, is curious as to the sense of how long the period was between the start and where we are today. And Julie, if you could share that, and maybe I can share it on the screen. I'll see if I can.
Yeah,
No,
I've just put it in the chat as well for everybody.
So if you could share it though, up on the screen, you have the sharing capability and I don't. But this is an excellent question from Francois. This obviously was happening for quite some time. It wasn't something that, you know, just happened. We can go back as early as September and look at the kill chain and what happened. So back to quantification and scoring, understanding what assets those vendors are protecting. This is a company that produces software that manages your network and your IT infrastructure. What could be more important than to have monitoring of that vendor, right? And really understanding what's going on. And no, we can't catch everything. And yes, it was missed by Solarwinds themselves when they certified the patching and went out. But we need to have more oversight. And I think that's where I'm going with this. And we need to train people and educate people as to what this all means from the business perspective. And this is what Pace Seidenberg is doing. This is what our programs focus on. We focus on helping you tie back these types of events to what does it mean for your business? And not just the SolarWinds, which are obvious, but the ones that are not so obvious. So Alex, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, and just to add a couple points to that, risk management as a whole and risk quantification has been mainly over the last few years focused on asking questions. Do you have this capability? Do you have that capability? Do you do this process or that process? What we haven't really done a very good job in as an industry is to quantify the effectiveness of all those processes. So just because you have a third-party management process doesn't mean it works well, doesn't mean it's effective. Just because you have threat hunting in your network doesn't mean it's effective, et cetera. So we need to actually shift to a quantification of risk that is based on the effectiveness of these processes rather than the existence of the processes. And then the second point is, if your vendor ever asks you to turn off a firewall because their software doesn't work otherwise, find another vendor.
That was something else that just shocked the living daylights out of me. I'm like, who would listen to that? I mean, this is common sense 101, and we are completely being, you know, we're listening to people's really bad advice. So
Yep.
One of us can go through this kill chain a little bit and go through the beginning to the end, because this is a question that was asked, and I think it's a good time to interject it. Perhaps one of the other panelists would like to take it, and I'd like to give them some more airtime.
Maybe Vince, because you're up. So if you could take this, that would be great. And I know this is something you worked on. So
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we could start off with this and then we could go into the questions. So
yeah,
as you can see through the timeline, September 4th, 2019, which is 18 months ago, right? It's the earliest date that the threat actors had access to the SolarWinds network, unbeknownst, obviously, to SolarWinds. On the 14th, it went through his, let's call them the POC testing phases of the malware to inject it into the Orion production environment. February 2020, right? There was lots of things going on with coronavirus, right? So lots of companies were distracted, ensuring that their business continuity plans were in place and so forth. So it bought the adversary some time to compile the malware and make sure that it works, and then they deploy it to the application. On the 20th, as you can see, March 26th of 2020, they officially compromise the Orion application and make it available to the customers. Very, very scary stuff. In May, they leveraged a sunburst malware to gain access to the victims' networks. Then back in June, they removed the malware, they clean up all the security logs to go fully undetected in their plan and scheme and so forth. And between that, you see the teardrop and the raindrop loaders start executing the Cobalt Strike beacon, meaning that's when they start the communications back to the adversary's network. And then, as you could see, about 7 months later, FireEye discloses this breach. I mean, you're looking at maybe a year's time frame that it's unbeknownst to companies that this is happening, which is way too long. To me, in my opinion, 1 day is too long, a week is too long, and so forth. And again, as Alex mentioned, there's still the unknown. Is it just SolarWinds? Is it another supply chain application? We just don't know. And that's the scary part, which is a perfect segue into the question, James.
Yeah, and this is the thing that we were going to ask you, and thank you for that terrific explanation. Running through this, but now is this affecting strategy for on-prem versus cloud deployment?
So because of this hack, there is no more perimeter, right? The gates are down, right? They got in this way. It's the world's wide open at this point. So does it impact my on-prem versus on-cloud strategy? It doesn't really matter. What it does impact is my cybersecurity strategy. I've been in defense mode for my whole tenure in this field. This year, I'm switching into an offensive mode. We have to start being offensive. As David was alluding to, we're in the process of implementing what we call a continuous threat hunting, pen testing, internal, external. We're going at the level that we're going to start conducting this weekly. The risk for us reputationally is far too large, right? So we can't just sit and wait for these things to happen. We have to switch into the offensive mode at this point and constantly look for these IOCs that potentially could be on the network, right? There's too many risks. Again, as I mentioned, reputational, there's regulatory risk. Now privacy is a whole big beast within itself. What if they capture personal information, exfiltrated, the fines are astronomical on top of legal costs. This to me is a complete nightmare for our industry. It is, like Alex mentioned, the best hack that I've ever seen. Again, the scary part is there's no end to this, right? How do we protect ourselves? Third-party risk, right? Compliance to a framework doesn't mean security, and we all know that, right? And the issue is constantly monitoring, right? You have this assessment that you perform on a third party. It's great today, but tomorrow, you know what? It's probably old. They probably changed controls that's unbeknownst to you until you ask the question again a year from now or 6 months from now, whatever your processes and so forth. So I think taking the offensive approach is a must-have at this point because again, 18 months, a year, 6 months is far too long. We need to identify the potential malware, these potential compromise as soon as possible to try to contain the damage and potentially exfiltrate them. Because again, the other scary part is we just don't know if clients don't know if these adversaries are still on the network. They shut everything down, they clear off the logs. How do we know they're still on the network?
All right. So 2 good questions from David for now, which I want to kind of throw to Vince and to the other panelists. One is about a zero trust approach, which we kind of alluded to. Are we, would that be more helpful? And then the second part, he talks about honeypots, establishing those as well, then some offensive tactics.
Absolutely. So zero trust is definitely a good security layer. The only issue with that is compromised credentials, right? One of the things that the hackers did was they did capture the golden ticket of Active Directory, which basically means they could create accounts and access to anything they want at that point, right? So that's the only downside with that. It's definitely an added layer in the security stack. As far as honeypots, absolutely. I'm in the process of setting up deception technology on my network, right? Mimicking confidential information services on my network to at least to assist us in capturing from an incident response that specific anomalous activity and so forth. So it's definitely a great added layers to your security stacks. And as everybody knows, constant risk assessment on your network is a must-have, right? The annuals, the semi-annuals, you have to constantly conduct these risk assessments internally, but most importantly, have the third party come in and kind of verify what you're doing is correct, right? Because we all have day jobs. We have to ensure our trading applications are working. We have clients that we have to report to. So I rely on my third-party companies because of their expertise, right? Because they're in the nitty-gritty every day. They are always updating the skill sets and so forth like that. So third-party, I call verification. Definitely, regulators love it. Clients love to see that. It's definitely an added layer of security within my information security program.
What is everybody else on the panel recommending and doing? I mean, that's the part we wanted to get to, right?
I'll say what we're doing. We're, severely restricted, and this isn't because of SolarWinds. We were doing this all along, but very, very restricted admin accounts. So very few people have them. Becoming an administrator in any sort of capacity requires two-factor authentication at all times, right? A very segmented network where I don't know if you want to call it zero trust, but you know, certain pieces run in their containers, and it's really difficult to get into those containers. I say difficult, not impossible. Nothing's impossible, right? But we want to make it as difficult as possible. I also agree with the honeypot idea. You want to put something out there that the bad guys want to go after, that you are watching, and continuous monitoring on the inside of your network, right? Not just the outside. Perimeter security is clearly not good enough, right? In these kind of attacks. So you have to monitor the inside of your network just like you monitor the outside of your network.
Right. And just to add to that, that's a great point, Alex, is the internal pen testing and also what they call the purple teaming, right? Testing your MSSPs. Make sure that your SIMs are fine-tuned. Make sure from an incident response perspective that your MSSPs, your internal blue team is able to detect these things, enriching your information in your SIMs and so forth with the threat intelligence information.
And on top of what Alex just said, I completely agree. And I think the approach that needs to be taken is the digital asset approach, because the only way to look at your admin access to see if the right people are having the assets and the wrong people are not having the assets is to do a digital asset inventory, understand which people are supposed to be doing what, and then tie that back into your security assessment processes, which is what we teach at PACE, how to do this. Otherwise, you cannot prioritize. You cannot put controls on everything. You can't be everywhere. But what you really do need to understand is that supply chain is connected to these assets. And if these assets are compromised, that supply chain is compromised. So having the digital asset inventory and the vendor inventory and making sure that they are synchronized and harmonious will give you a head start on how to first quantify the risk, you know, in terms of either data exfiltration, intellectual property, reputational damage, and business interruption types of financial exposures, and the likelihood that you're going to have a compromise. So if you're putting multi-factor across parts of your infrastructure, but you're missing some key assets and they don't have MFA, well, that's a problem, right? So we've got to get smarter, and we also have to get somewhat offensive. The honeypot idea is fantastic. Thank you, David Diaphano, for that on the chat. It is definitely the way to go with this.
So one thing that we have started doing is really looking at our software development and product development process again, because ultimately, you know, this is where SolarWinds fell short. So, you know, how much can we harden our own services and products we bring to market? How effective are we in, for example, applying DevSecOps, right? For those who are not familiar with DevSecOps, in simple terms, is rather than developing software and then thinking about security afterwards, security becomes an integrated part of the development process. You know, in every single stage as we develop software or develop a product, security hardening, vulnerability, and so on and so forth is part of that process. And that's something that companies like SolarWinds and other service providers and software companies should take as a lessons learned and action from that breach.
Yeah, you're 100% right on that, Alex. I'm actually in the midst of building a framework with my developers, implementing a security scanning tool. And the policy is code cannot go into test until it's fully secure. It has to be zero vulnerabilities. That's a great point, Alex.
And, the term zero trust has been thrown around, and, that really has a big impact on the way we look at security, because that applies to every aspect and almost becomes a framework in itself called zero trust. We're moving from, if you look at your NAC system, if you look at your continuous pen testing, if you look at your document storage and all that kind of stuff, zero trust is the starting point now. And, that's a very good conversation and questionnaire topics for your vendors in terms of how are they approaching zero trust, and, are they compliant with sort of a zero trust mentality as they come into your environment.
One of the areas that, and I think this conversation is terrific. One of the areas that we wanted to kind of touch on a little bit is really, even incident response planning. How does it address this type of an incident? And we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'll throw this out to the panelists. How are you walking clients through this, or within your own organizations? How are you addressing this, as an incident response? This is very different than what we've seen before.
I could take that. So as I was alluding to before, I guess the offensive approach is definitely going to help with the incident response as far as testing your incident response as a whole. I think one thing that's also key is conducting tabletop exercises, right? So it's beyond technology at that point. So what happens if you're hacked from a legal perspective, right? I mean, marketing perspective and so forth. So there's a whole process within incident response. So I think conducting tabletops and increasing that awareness among the business on what the potential action plans would be in the event that, God forbid, you were compromised with SolarWinds, client information, trading algorithms, investment algorithms were exfiltrated. What do we do? How do we handle that? How do we get legal involved? How do we alert the regulators? How do we get the privacy regulators, comfortable that, we follow our own process that complies to regulatory obligations and so forth. So it's beyond technology at that point.
Great. I think that's super helpful. And, it seems.
Well, I just wanted to add to that, Jim, because I think that there's a whole discipline that needs to be structured and created within each organization specifically around identity and access management. We see very sloppy enforcement of the policies many, many times. Although the policies exist, people ignore them because they're not being monitored, right? So having a discipline around not just SSDLC, which is where it all starts in this case, right? And not allowing, the DevOps teams to promote code without the DBAs approving it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, which drives me bananas, in case you didn't notice that. And really having the discipline and understanding that if what you're developing is going to be supply chain oriented, then there needs to be more testing. There needs to be more process around it. There needs more. And I know no one wants to hear that, but it's the truth because it was missed. And the reason that it's missed is because it's not prioritized up to the top somewhere above everything else, because no one's connecting the digital asset dots and saying, hey, that's supply chain. And there's, if it's a financial services company, it's going to be the financial exposures they care about. If it's a development company, it's going to be about the intellectual property that they care about. If it's the federal government, it's going to be about information that's related to our democratic process, right? So we've got to understand the business aspect of this to make these decisions, or we're just going to keep, having the same problems over and over again.
Ariel, can I comment on that? And
please.
Some folks might not like that comment, but we found that it's a lot about user friendliness. And what I mean with that is, as you review identity and access management and login requirements, often if the process is too cumbersome and not user friendly, users will do everything to circumvent it because it's annoying, it's a nuisance, and they don't like it. You can't expect for a user to think about the broader implications of what they're doing or not doing. This is why we see a lot of companies, and this includes us, to pay a lot of attention in sense of how user-friendly is the security measure we are implementing or the means of authentication, because we want users to be disciplined and to adhere to it. So the same way we try users to train users not to click on every email and attachment, the same holds true when it comes to identity and access management, least privilege. So keep in mind that the more friendly and easy accessible you make it for the user, that also can be a part of your security strategy.
And just to add something to that, I 100% agree with what you just said, Alex, in terms of user friendliness. But on top of that, also making it very obvious to folks that, to quote an old time military slogan, security is everybody's job, right? Making it really clear that security is not just the job of the security people. It's literally every person in the company, right? If you want your company to be around, you want to keep getting a paycheck, it's your job too, right? And not saying it in a scary way, not in a threatening way, but just explaining to people why these things are really important. I do this all the time with the team here at my company. I just explain to them, right?
And just to put a little pitch in there for PACE, this is what the Enterprise Cybersecurity Certificate Program does, is it takes all the non-technical people and it brings them into the fold and it teaches them what they need to know from the business side of it. So thanks for mentioning that, Alex.
And this situation is created, and I'll throw this back to Ariel, because I'd like her to opine on this, but is this a pivot point? Is this, as someone has put in the chat here, was this the cyber Pearl Harbor that we've been talking about? I know it's not kinetic, right? It's not it's not an industrial control system issue or a health issue per se, but was this it? And
I hope so. I mean, it is, from a federal perspective, we haven't had anything like this since the NSA problems. What we are learning, and the DoD is on top of this a little bit, is that we can no longer check boxes and say that's enough. We have to have a trust and verify method. Now, whether you attribute that to Ronald Reagan or to Mikhail Gorbachev, that's up to you, but it doesn't matter. From our perspective, we know this doesn't work. And the definition of insanity is doing the same behavior and expecting a different result. So we need auditing around this aspect of the supply chain and the third parties, especially for, and again, prioritization around critical assets, around critical infrastructure, around crown jewel assets of the business, that if they are exposed, if their trade secrets are stolen, if they are breached, you can't get that back. It's like, what are we going to do now about this? There's backdoors everywhere. It's like, this is really bad. And if people don't understand how bad it is, trust us, it's really bad. It's probably the worst. It is a Pearl Harbor. It's an absolute disaster. It's a Shoah. It's the Holocaust. And
I would actually say it's worse than Pearl Harbor in a way, right? Because in Pearl Harbor, you had an attack, you could respond. Here, to your point, Ariel, there's a ton of backdoors that have been built for certain, right? We don't know exactly what they all are and where they all are and how many there are. They haven't been exploited, right? At some point in time, they might be. So the Pearl Harbor is actually coming. It hasn't happened yet.
And just to build on that, from rather than equate it to a Pearl Harbor, it really is the first time that the whole C-suite has gotten visibility into what the damage could be from a security hack. Meaning, the CISOs are always kind of ahead of the curve a little bit, and anybody who's involved with IT and security, they're ahead of it, but they're always having a hard time getting budget from the CEOs because all they want is profits. They want to maximize the usability of the company. They want to, increase the amount of people that can do business with them. And sometimes securing that organization is counter to profits. And this is the hack that showed the CEOs what could happen to their company. And I think that's an inflection point for more education throughout organizations and everything we've been talking about on the call. So Just
Maybe an alternative perspective, if I may. You might remember a couple of years back, we started talking about, hey, CISOs should always assume that they have been breached, right? Always assume you are already in a state of breach. So look at it this way. To our knowledge, how many hackers and adversaries, whether they're financially motivated or state-sponsored, they don't intend to attack every victim they infiltrate. So they build portfolios, right? So there's the concept of dwell time, meaning if I successfully infiltrate, I might dwell there for a month before I decide, actually, I want to activate that piece of my portfolio now. Therefore, I'm not sure this is a Pearl Harbor. I think this is just another event in a series of events where, an increasing number of assets get infiltrated, hackers build out their portfolios. And therefore, to your point, education, continuous threat hunting, they should be standard processes that we apply over and over again, and not only when something happened that has a lot of public visibility. So I believe that the damage in general, including previous hacks, is potentially much bigger if we think about these groups building portfolios that they only might activate a year later, for example.
All these points are relative. And the reason why I say it's Pearl Harbor is because Pearl Harbor was the beginning of the war. That's when we were bombed and we got into the war, right? So it's the beginning of the war, in my opinion. And we saw the Trump administration was mute. There was no tweets about what happened here. What the heck? Really, it's like, in other words, it went like this, or it was just, not in his best political interest to do anything about it, right? So what is the new administration going to do about this? Are they going to step up? Are they going to get a clue here what's going on in terms of critical infrastructure, democracy, and the whole 9 yards? If they do, then that would be great, because maybe we'll get some government and corporate cooperation around this, which has been non-existent for the most part. And the SMEs, and someone brought that point up in the chat, like, what do? It's like, exactly, they are your supply chain. It's like, what can we do for the SMEs to help them? Because the larger corporations are using, them as, either getting raw materials or, part of the ecosystem for their supplies. So we need to be together on this. And the PACE thing is about creating a community of cyber resiliency and about getting businesses involved and getting them to understand what they don't understand. And so this is really our moment to try and seize this and get more in front of everybody and tell them what the heck's going on and get them to get involved.
And do the panelists think that, as a point, that cyber education, is going to help, right? Because oftentimes we've seen an event happen, kind of fades away. Like Ariel said, there was not a whole lot of talk about this unless you follow it, right? It's almost kind of, we do follow this, so it's on our mind every day, but you're not hearing as much about this as I think as we should be hearing about it, right? And we haven't. So education is part of that. But again, as Ariel was talking about the PACE program and some of the other things, but how would cyber education help prevent something like this from happening? Is that possible?
I think there's oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think education is definitely key. From I guess, education perspective with the hack, I think it's a good thing that this happened, right? Because it just helps you fight the cause. At this point, educating C-level executives from a business perspective, telling them what the impact is to a hack. They think hack, they think technology. No, this is the risk. We get quote unquote hacked. You know what? We could suffer millions of dollars in fines, right? We could lose clients, right? That's quantifiable and so forth. And keeping the education to their face. So we, for my company, we send out metrics on a monthly basis now. We want them to know that, hey, there's overdue vulnerabilities, there's issues with this vendor and so forth. So it has to be in their face constantly. Do they forget? Absolutely, because they have a business to run. But education, educating them, educating users, I think is definitely key. And just explain to them why we are in this. Why are we doing this? What's the impact if they click on a link? What could happen to the company and so forth like that? And it's in my company, at least it's well accepted. They understand what the impact is, and they want to be the last person to be the one that was the I guess let's call the tunnel into the network that compromised our clients' information.
Okay. Alex?
So,
Diana has something to say.
so I wasn't sure which Alex, sorry. So, not wanting to be a fearmonger or create panic, but I couldn't agree more to the topic of awareness and education. And here's why we are a bit nervous about, the education awareness piece. Think a couple years into the future, see what's happening with 5G and mobile edge compute, meaning the use cases that these technologies will enable us to do will result in breaches potentially resulting in more than financial and reputational damage, right? If you look at breaches today, they are, to a majority affecting, to your point, being affected financially or reputationally. So a lot of people shrug it off and say, yeah, these companies, they can afford it. And, so what if these large companies get fined? But if you think, 2, 3, 4 years ahead in time, autonomous driving, smart communities, mobile healthcare, telesurgery, we quickly move into a territory where every normal citizen will and can be affected, and where a breach could cost human lives. So everything we can do now to get the broader population to a degree of maturity, understanding, and awareness will help us as we, as the potential impact increases over time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Alex Beigelman?
Yeah, just to add to that also, and something that I just saw the other day on TV, and just to add to Alex's comment, absolutely, I totally agree. There's a new invention, let's call it, a person who created a thermometer, right, that takes temperatures of people and uploads it to the cloud, right? To me, it was like, oh my gosh, it captures name, personal information, so forth like that. So just to kind of combat future potential a cluster of viruses and so forth like that. But just imagine from the cyber side, imagine that cloud being impacted, right? HIPAA rules and so forth like that. So, or these new cars, right? Google just made a deal, I think with Ford, was it? I forgot which car company, right? To develop applications for the cars. We all know cars were easily hackable, and which I saw back in Black Hat. A hacker showed how he was able to hack into a car and actually drive the car remotely. So these are the scary things we have to be concerned about, besides our normal everyday business.
Just to add something, and this was mentioned in the chat on the side here as well. One of the biggest roadblocks to making security better is the lack of appreciation by senior management boards, et cetera, of how important this is. They think it's a technology problem, so fine, you technology people go deal with it, right? But actually, it's more than just about getting a few $1 million in fines. It could be catastrophic. It could be you're out of business, you're done, right? Therefore, it isn't a technology problem. It's a strategic business problem. Getting people to, at the board level, the CEO level, et cetera, to actually understand that is an education problem. Right? It isn't you don't need them to be technology experts or security experts. You need them to understand what these risks are at a non-technical level, right? And appreciate them so that the right things can be done. So it's purely an education problem at that level. So education is therefore critical.
But that brings me back to my original comment around cyber quantification and how do we score and measure how mature and serious companies take this, right? So think back to Equifax, right? Was Equifax punished? Did anybody stand up and say, you were so negligent in the way you manage security, you should be punished, right? And I think that's one part we're missing, to say, we want public information about how this or that company treats their cybersecurity posture. And if they're negligent, there should be consequences.
This is an absolutely fantastic point, and it's leading into one of the questions from the folks on the phone, is saying, I think security, this is from Francois, thank you very much. I think security needs to be considered an asset. Once you think about an asset, you can assign a value, return, and a benefit. So again, going back to digital asset, cyber risk quantification, and scoring, this is what's going to be used in the future for credit scoring. Dun & Bradstreet is looking at this now. Several other areas are looking at this, because what's going to translate, cyber is really truly the #1 business risk, first of all. Therefore, it's an enterprise risk, because 85% of your business is a digital asset. And this is what the cyber criminal attacks. They steal the data, they interrupt the processes, and they cause you the regulatory penalties and fines, and you can quantify those. And then you can look at how the asset is protected and where you need to prioritize the protection controls and mechanisms that you have. So once we start to get clear on, we have to quantify, and we've been preaching this now for 3 years, guys, 3 years. And it's like, we really understand that piece, because otherwise we can't all get on the same page, number one. And number two, we can't do what everyone else here is suggesting, which is to really bring it to the level of oversight that needs to happen at the business level, so that they can start, stop giving us a % of IT spend as a budget. That's ridiculous. They can look at charging the business units back to protect their assets. It's like, why should one team pay more than another team when they own 80% of the digital assets? They shouldn't. It doesn't make sense. And that gives it a profitability model and a P&L and the ability to actually make sense out of this stuff. Because right now it's a bunch of cyber jargon that no boards understand. They get mesmerized, they get anxious and nervous, and they get, they basically can't be effective.
One thing that might actually be helpful here is to borrow something that the federal regulators have done, maybe unconsciously, but well and usefully in this space, is the way banks compute how much reserve capital they must have is, or one of the major inputs into this is they run scenarios. So if thing X happens, what is the impact, right? And one area where scenarios are run is cyber, right? If a particular cyber event occurs and it impacts X, Y, and Z, what is the impact on the bank from a financial perspective, right? So those aren't easy to do, but when you do them, it is very eye-opening, right? Because when the answer comes back in the billions, and it does, right? That gets people's attention. Now, doesn't have to be, that's for a major bank, billions, right? It doesn't have to be in the billions for a smaller company, but you actually can convert this stuff to dollars. If we're unable to, take the NotPetya attack for 2017 and your Mars shipping, right? If I ask you, well, what is the impact if we happen to lose track of every ship we have and what is on those ships, what is the financial impact on that? You could probably do a pretty decent job of computing. It'll cost me $1 billion to deal with that, right? Or whatever the number is. Those kind of numbers are very eye-opening to people. They don't have to understand the cyber piece of it. They have to understand the impact of that cyber.
Exactly. We did a case, and we did a case study exactly what you're describing on Merck when the NotPetya attack happened, and what they put into that analysis was, Gardasil. They had no Gardasil, so they had to go to the stockpile, the national stockpile, and borrow $240 million worth of Gardasil. I mean, these are the supply chain impacts that people are just completely missing because they're not looking at the business piece of it again. It's not just the data exfiltration, it's not just the business interruption piece of it, it's all the other pieces that are tied together because it's a holistic enterprise risk.
I think, what Alex is spot on, and, also to other comments, too many companies still approach cybersecurity with just throwing technology at it and hoping it's good enough, right? I bought all this tool, I bought this vendor and that vendor, and, let's assume it's good enough, versus working backwards from the worst possible outcome, right? So this is something we started, working with customers. To my earlier comment around 5G is start with the worst possible outcome, with the scenario of what would happen if this use case is being breached, and then work backwards to understand whether the security posture that was put in place is strong enough against that scenario. Or in other words, if you use 5G and Mac, for example, to enable edge supported gaming, you need a different security posture versus an autonomous driving car, right? So it should be backwards rather than just throwing tech at it and hoping it will be good enough.
Well said, indeed. Another question from the audience is around educating in terms of regulations and security requirements around some of the frameworks that we have out there now, GDPR being fairly new, CMMC now being put together by the DoD, still a little bit loosey-goosey in terms of what they're really requiring. But I think what this is this is one part of our equation, right? Where we have to look at the financial exposures, we have to look at the supply chain exposures, we have to look at the likelihood they're going to be breached, what we call inherent risk. Then we look at how secure the controls are and what that CMMC is going to do, which is going to be the 800-171, and GDPR, which you can use any security assessment framework for, but you also have a set of additional requirements that are data subject, process oriented, are going to help to mitigate that risk, right? Because they're mitigating controls. And then we have to understand from our cybersecurity tools, to Alex's point, we have layered tools, and I think we're maxing out on the layered tools at this point, but take the data from that and look at the context of it to see, is this risk acceptable? What does it impact? Like to the point about autonomous economies, smart cars, autonomous cars, smart homes, et cetera, is that all this interconnectivity just explodes the attack surface. And this is where we have to use digital asset. We have to know what's connected to what. We have to know the supply chain, and we have to put it all together. But if we don't get to those decision makers up at the top, we can pontificate forever. But we've got to get them to understand what we're trying to tell them.
We've got about a minute or two, so I just real quick, if we could just run through the panelists, your final words, final thoughts, starting with Dave Gordon.
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity as well as a challenge, and we need to treat it as such in terms of putting the controls in place to address this on a continuous basis, be more offensive, be more proactive with the way we secure ourselves, but also pay attention to being easy to do business with.
Right. Vince?
Yeah, it's just what I was alluding to earlier. It's constant risk assessments, very important, and also education. That is definitely key. Just educating the users as much as possible, just so they remember the impact to any breach to a firm.
Okay, Alex Beigelman.
Sure. Again, just making sure your whole staff knows security is their job too. Educating people, really important for them to understand. They don't have to understand at a technical level, really, really crucial. And rethinking the actual security, the technical aspect of security and process aspect too. Basically, assume you've been breached, assume you have no perimeter. Can you still secure your shop? What do you do with that, right? Think differently.
Alex Schlager.
Nothing much to add. Thank you. I simply say, let's see it as an opportunity to continue education and awareness. Thank you.
Final word, Ariel.
Sure. First of all, thank you to all the panelists. You guys are just absolutely rocking. And a special thank you also to Jim and to our audience members. And all I want to say is educate, educate, educate. This panel is being recorded. It is available to you to download and to share with your peers, your colleagues, whoever you want. So please do so. Please take advantage of the collective brain wisdom here and be safe.